I hope everybody was able to get at least a few minutes of sleep last night. And how about those Texas Rangers? Do we have any rain? Yeah. All right, first time in 52 years. That's a good way to cap off a great day yesterday. And you all, it was great getting to know you all, getting to meet so many new faces, and it's neat to welcome you to our new Herd Center, our new Herd Welcome Center. This is pretty fancy digs, huh? Yeah, it's pretty nice. And so this is our first time to do an event over here today, this morning, and Grace will give you some instructions after our plenary concludes. But today, this morning, we're going to do breakout sessions in this building. And so you'll have some time to walk around, explore the building. There's a nice little Baylor gear shop across the big hall from here. And so you can go buy some Baylor merch, take it home to your kids if you want to. Today this morning we're having our research panel. And when we talk about cultivating scalable solutions in hunger, we talk about it by using a three-pronged approach. So combining research with public service and public policy. And here's why. Oftentimes, when we're doing great work in communities, when we see you all in your communities doing great work, in many cases, you all will approach us and say, we think we have a program that is worthy of scale, or we think we have a program that is built for replication. And that's the exciting thing for us when we're able to do field work. And so we as a team have a public service team that's scattered throughout the state of Texas and really kind of work in Texas as a laboratory of sorts. And so we're working to try to figure out what's working in McAllen that also might work in West Texas or Dallas that we could then take to Washington, D.C., or Des Moines, or even Alaska. And so what we've identified is that when we pair public service, or as Brian Stevenson says, he says you can't solve a social problem without from a distance. You have to have proximity to the problem. So if you pair proximity with research, that's when you're really able to identify what is worthy of scale. Because there's a parable in the New Testament where a farmer goes out to the field and he's scattering seed every which direction. Some seed falls on good soil, some rocky soil, some soil among the thorns. And what we've learned over time is that when you pair research with proximity, you're able to identify where that good soil is. So that the efforts that you all are putting forth to try to address hunger in your communities are likely to bear literal fruit for the families that you serve. But that's the critical component for us to identify if something is worthy of scale that we can then take potentially to Congress to see if we can explore with Congress on ways that we might have a scalable solution for all people around our country or people even in a global context. So today you have the great opportunity, we all do, to hear from three of our top economists in Texas who are working on the food security space. Dr. Craig Gunderson, he's one of our own here at Baylor University. We also have an opportunity to hear from Rudy Naga. Rudy is the chair of the Agriculture and Econ Department at Texas A&M, and then Tammy Leonard also joining us. And Tammy, many of you know, has been a critical component of research in the food security landscape, particularly in the Dallas area with our Dallas Coalition for Hunger Solutions. The panel today is going to be moderated by Dr. Tom Hibbs. Dr. Hibbs is currently the Jade Newton Razor Senior Professor of Philosophy at Baylor, where he's also the Dean Emeritus. Having served 16 years as the Dean of the Honors College and Distinguished Professor of Ethics and Culture. He's the founding director of the Baylor in Washington program, and he directs Baylor's DC summer program on religion and social life. Dr. Hibbs has his PhD from the University of Notre Dame, where he serves as a tutor at the Thomas Aquinas College. He's a full professor and department chair. He has been full professor and department chair of philosophy at Boston College and president of the University of Dallas. At Baylor, Hibbs also serves as the director of the Baylor in Washington, D.C. program, and we are very grateful to have him today moderating our panel. Panelists, would y'all come join us? Thank you.
this on now? Is this on? Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you. Now it's on. I'm really honored to be moderating this panel. I'm going to give some brief introductions, and then we'll let them get started. We will take questions at the end, as Grace mentioned. I'd like to introduce the panel. We have Rudy Nyga, professor and head of the Department of Agricultural Economics at Texas A&M, on the far left here. Dr. Nyga's research interests include the economics of food valuation, consumption, policy, and health. He has examined issues related to how people comprehend and use food and nutritional labels, and how these would then influence a number of important health-related outcomes, such as diet quality and obesity. He has also analyzed the effects of important federal food programs, such as the National School Lunch Program, SNAP, and the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program on food consumption and obesity. His work in this area provides crucial information on the causal effects of important federal food programs policies on health outcomes of various segments of the population, including children and historically disadvantaged groups. He has been a Fulbright senior scholar in the Netherlands and has held positions in Korea, Norway, and Japan. He's a fellow of the Agricultural and Applied Economics Association, current president of that organization, and co-editor of the American Journal of Agricultural Economics. Rudy, it's really good to have you here with us at Baylor. Tammy Leonard, we worked together. It's great to be back with her. We worked together for a time at the University of Dallas. Her research interests include understanding the impact of housing markets, neighborhoods, nonprofits, and government policies on health and other measures of well-being, particularly for low-income population. She's now at UT Southwestern, where she does that work. Her work is highly interdisciplinary and involves collaborations across multiple sectors. She is co-director of the Community Assistance Research Initiative, CARE, a community academic partnership that aims to improve the lives of low and middle income populations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area through evidence-based research. Dr. Leonard is also editor of the peer-reviewed journal Review of Regional Studies. In her current work, she's examining the way in which neighborhood race is capitalized into housing markets. She is also collaborating with leaders in the nonprofit sector in North Texas to develop new approaches to achieving economic and food security through leveraging behavioral economics and financial coaching models. These approaches are informing a new food assistance program to achieve improved health and well-being. Craig Gunderson is the Snee Family Endowed Chair. I know we have Jim and Tammy here with us this morning. Very glad to have them here. He holds the Snee Family Endowed Chair in the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty. He's also a professor in the Department of Economics at Baylor. He's a technical advisory group for Feeding America, the lead researcher on Feeding America's Map the Meal Gap project, and managing editor for the journal Applied Economic Perspectives and Policy. He's also a roundtable fellow of the Farm Foundation and a faculty affiliate of the Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunity at the University of Notre Dame. His research concentrates on the causes and consequences of food insecurity and on the evaluation of food assistance programs with a particular emphasis on SNAP. His research has been funded by more than $20 million in external funding from more than 25 grant-giving agencies. He's appeared frequently in the media and in presentations to policymakers and program administrators. Welcome to all three of you. I think we want to start out with you, Craig, offering some comments on the state of food insecurity. Give us a sense of where things are, how you see things, and maybe how your research fits into that, and then we'll ask Rudy and Tammy to follow up with you on whatever comments they would like to add about the current state of things and how their own research contributes to solutions. Craig, please.
Okay, great. So thank you, Tom. I want to thank BCHIP for inviting us to be a part of this. Really happy to be up here with the four of you. And thank all of you. I appreciate you all coming. A lot of other things you could be doing today, so I appreciate you all being here. I really do. You know, we got 4 Catholics up here on stage. So today's All Souls Day, and so after we get through speaking, we're going to say a couple decades of the Rosary. So I hope that's okay for everybody. I'm just joking, of course. But what I do want to talk about is food insecurity. And so just to give you, I want to talk about 3 key components about what's happened to food insecurity from 2010 to 2022. Okay. The first thing is that from 2010 up to 2021 there was a sharp decline in food insecurity. Okay, overall rates fell by 40% and even higher declines amongst households with children. Okay, and that's generally ascribed to three main factors that we can talk about. First, critical to this, and we're going to be talking about this in many different dimensions, is a strong social safety net, especially with SNAP. Okay, we have this strong basis of a strong social safety net for those who are otherwise maybe left behind. The second critical thing is economic growth. So if we want to alleviate food insecurity in our country, we need economic growth. We need a lot of economic growth, both to raise people out of food insecurity, but also to fund our different programs that we have to address food insecurity. And there's economic growth over this time, but there's also this huge movement to areas with stronger economic growth. I mean, Texas, we got a big state, we can welcome a lot more people, and this is part of the reason why food insecurity rates, people are moving to areas of high growth, like Texas and places all across the South. They're moving away from dying states like Illinois, like I moved down here. But at any rate, so in other words, is you have these things, this movement to the south. So not only economic growth, but also people moving towards areas of greater economic growth. So this economic growth is critical. The third thing that's critical is low food prices, okay? We're very lucky in the United States. We have this amazing ag supply sector from our farms all the way up to our supermarkets where things are so efficient that we're able to keep food prices low, okay? So those 3 components is what led to the decline in food insecurity from 2010 to 2021, okay? Economic growth, low food prices, and then finally is a strong social safety net for those in need. This last year, from 2021 to 2022, there was a sharp increase in food insecurity. Okay, rates rose quite a bit. And if we look at this, if we want to compare 2019 to 2022, is really, there was one technical thing where they changed around some of the measurement. That was part of the reason why there's this increase. But really, the only explanation behind this is the sharp increase in food prices, okay? From 2010 to 2019, food prices rose combined over those 9 years, 11%, okay? Whereas if you look at food prices from 2019 to 2022, they rose by 25% in those 3 years, okay? This, like I said before, food prices matter. Nowhere do they matter more than when we saw this increase in food insecurity over this time period. Now, for those of us, to use a term, lucky enough to have the resources such that we're comfortable, is higher food prices don't matter, okay? It doesn't really matter if we have to spend more when we go to the supermarket. But for vulnerable households, when they're spending 20% of their income or more on food, small increases in prices leads them into food insecurity, okay? I think throughout this we'll have some chances to talk about policy, and I hope to come back to those. But there's one point I want to make about all of this, and this is something I've been trying to emphasize a lot whenever I give presentations. Economic growth, low food prices, a strong social safety net is critical, but there's a lot of people being left behind, okay? And the leading predictor of food insecurity in the United States is disability status, especially mental health disabilities. That's the leading predictor of food insecurity in the United States. We have to help out those suffering from mental health challenges. And sometimes this can be government-run interventions, but more often than not, it's things that are done at the local level through our churches and through other faith-based organizations to address these issues. That's one group especially prone to food insecurity. I'll give 3 other examples. Is those suffering from loneliness. Those without community support are much more likely, okay? Those suffering from addictions, whether it be alcoholism or other forms of drug addiction, are much more likely to be food insecure. And the recently incarcerated who are coming back into our communities are at higher risk, okay? Those are 4 groups that I think that we are especially well positioned to try to help those out. So even though there was a sharp decline in food insecurity, and after inflation goes away, we hope it goes away, food insecurity rates will go down again, but let us never forget those who are left behind. Now, I'm going to turn it over to more better words of wisdom from Rudy and Tammy.
Okay, well, so I just want to, those were great points, Craig, and I just want to add some nuance to the story. And, you know, the story that I always told as I've been in this space is that food insecurity spiked to record high levels during the 2007-2009 recession. And I remember I used to talk to my college students, and I would say, you know, it took 12 years or 10 years. It was a long time before food insecurity got back down to levels that they were historically, we thought, the norm that occurred before that recession. And so when I would talk to my college students, like, think about this. Some of your classmates in school, their family was stable, and then they experienced in and out of food insecurity their entire time they were in grade school, from kindergarten to 12th grade. And they're not sitting beside you in this wonderful college classroom right now because of those challenges. And so I don't want to forget those challenges and forget where we were. Now, I'll tell you, I was scared when the pandemic happened, as all of us were scared, right? Here we go again. We had just gotten back to where we were before. It's going to happen all over again, right? We're going to have another generation of kids that are going to grow up on the edge. I mean, whether you're food insecure this year, the fact that you might be food insecure is damaging to a child living in these households, right? And it didn't happen. I think that's a surprising story. We didn't see food insecurity spike until last week when the new numbers came out. It didn't spike. It's not at the levels it was in the last recession. And so, you know, I think Craig's right in a lot of the underlying factors, but I think we also have to think of a few other things in that, one, you know, we've had tremendous economic growth between the 2007-2009 recession and 2020, but we didn't see wage growth in the lower income levels until very, very late in that economic recovery. We just started seeing those wage growth right before the COVID pandemic, which we know disproportionately hit those very sectors of the economy where those low wage growth was just starting to trickle out. So that's a challenge, right, in terms of food insecurity, because it's helpful to not be food insecure. It's more helpful to be economically secure so that I'm not depending on others to achieve my food security. And I think we haven't quite perhaps cracked that, although we don't have a solid measure for that in the data. The other thing is, I don't know, I think most of you in the philanthropic space, at least in my world in Dallas, we had some projects we were going to roll out, then the pandemic hit, and every bit of funding was going to the food sector. It was going to alleviate food insecurity, which was great. We didn't see the spike. Mission accomplished. But I think there's a challenge out there for all of us that we don't know. We don't have a lot of resources. We know budgets are tight everywhere, and we're fighting with each other a lot of times to get scarce resources to do our programs. I think that we've now proven we can alleviate food insecurity for a lot of populations. There's still so many that are left behind, but we got to do it more efficiently. We can't be sucking up all the resources because there's other problems out there too, and they're the underlying causes of economic insecurity, education, health, right? All these other things that drive people into the food insecure state. So, you know, I think this is a challenge in my mind that I'm toying with in my research and thinking about how do we use our resources most efficiently, because we have to feed people, we have to get them secure, but we'd like to also have resources so they don't get there in the first place. And how do we do that? I think there's a lot of, for me, that's a stewardship question. Or am I being a good steward of these resources and using them most effectively? Okay, I've talked enough. Rudy.
Good morning, everyone. I don't think I have anything else to add, but I want to emphasize two things. I think education that Tammy mentioned and economic growth that you mentioned, because economic growth really is a source of a lot of employment, right? If people are employed, then they'll have more money and be able to afford food. Craig actually asked me, since I'm currently the president of the American Ag Economics Association, to inform me about some of the things that ag economists actually do in this area. I want to emphasize that as economists, we really focus on figuring out what the causal effect is of one factor on another. And so a lot of ag economists focus on two things. One is determining the effect of different factors on food insecurity status, right? But another thing, it's probably more important, is figuring out the effect of food insecurity, the causal effect of food insecurity on dietary health outcomes. It's a little bit challenging. It's a big challenge for us economists because when we're using observational data, it's not easy to tease out the causal effect of things. So that's what we've been focusing on really a lot as economists. Many of us have also focused on figuring out the food access issue. So we've done a lot of work on food deserts and how we can improve food access, especially for disadvantaged people. Food justice is another topic that's really becoming more and more of interest to a lot of economists. Many of us have worked on food banks, including all the panelists here. Another topic that's really becoming more of a focus is on climate change, right? And the effect of climate change on not only food production, but also food consumption, not just in the US, but around the world. Consequently, there's a lot of focus on food waste, right? Because it's got an environmental impact on it, on food supply chains, if you will, how we can make our food supply chains more resilient, especially given what we found or what happened during the COVID pandemic. A lot of work on food systems, also in precision regenerative agriculture, how we can make food production more climate friendly, if you will. So a lot of economists have looked at the issues on sustainable food systems and sustainable food production. I mentioned school meals. Many of us have done work on figuring out the effect of school meals, right, on children's food consumption and dietary quality. I know Tammy here, and I think Craig as well, has done a lot of work applying behavioral economics concepts, right? So a lot of us are doing experiments, actually, economic experiments. An example of this would be experimenting what would be the effect of different nudges, right, on people's behavior, right, including children. And as Tom mentioned, we've done a lot of work as well on how we can incentivize and motivate people to use more information and educate them more with food labels as well.
Great, thank you. Rudy, you've just given us a long list of research topics. I think that's a natural follow-up question on that is, for each of you to say in a little bit more detail, which area of research you're working on right now that you find most exciting and promising, and what you want practitioners, it's mainly a room of practitioners, to know about that research and how you think it might directly impact the work of the practitioners we have in the room. Tammy, why don't you start us off on that?
Sure. So this is a bit of a trick question for me because probably the thing I'm most excited about, we have a breakout session into today, the last session, so go see that. But I'll give you a brief preview. It's work I'm doing with Crossroads Community Services, and it's been years building and networking and trying to get this rolling because we've done a lot of work with behavioral economics it started out looking at access. The transportation. People don't have transportation. That's what we thought. But then we started digging into access and we started asking questions and we discovered there's this, at least in the North Texas food pantry world, and I imagine it's other places too, this norm that you shouldn't go to the pantry and get food unless you really need it. So when we think of pantries preventing food insecurity, they're not doing that, they're treating it, because no one even accesses them usually, unless they're already food insecure. And so we kept following that, and where we've landed is we realize we can set up appointments to reset that norm, because I tell you when you're in front of me, let's schedule when you're gonna come back next month. What? Yeah, and let's not wait and say, will I come back next month? Let's schedule it. Because look, if I can give you $100, $200 worth of groceries and your kids are gonna go to college because of that, that's the best investment I can make, right? And so doing that, we started getting in conversation with people more, right? And this is going through the pandemic. So right whenever everything became in-person and virtual, we had, just started a randomized controlled trial of very personal and in-person stuff. So we moved it to the virtual space, but we still stayed really personal. And I was also at the same time doing some work with financial coaching, which is also done. There's lots of great players in North Texas and across the state in that space. And I knew Wings were kind of experts in financial coaching. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, what Wings is saying they talk about in financial coaching is what people are coming to Crossroads and talking to their volunteers about. Light bulb moment. So we've put the two organizations in conversation. We've gotten some funding from Communities Foundation, and we're figuring out, we're now calling it resource coaching, and I think it has wings in many sectors outside of food. The idea is to use a coaching approach to walk with clients and encourage them to utilize resources that we provide through crisis and beyond. Because a lot of times when you just start looking, I started paying attention to literature, crisis management. It's like when somebody's in crisis, what do? You get them out of crisis, right? Somebody's not eating, we need to give you food. Somebody is unhoused, we need to get you housed. And that's absolutely right. But we can go beyond that. We can use these behavioral approaches around coaching to coach them through crisis, because as we all know, most of our low-income folks don't have one crisis in their life. They don't even have 5 spells of crisis in their lives. They have every quarter crisis in their lives. And so we have, I think, this is a light bulb moment for me, we haven't put a lot of thought into resilience and coaching people to give the skills to manage their crises, so that we can keep them in the kind of challenged but stable world and then push them into these more behavioral change. So that's our thing. We're looking food resource coaching as a pathway to financial coaching, so that we're similar skill sets, so it's not a new experience when you start talking about longer term financial security, but we're starting that when you're in crisis so that you gain those skills to manage your crisis, and we're learning. So come to our session this afternoon, because we're all interested in ideas too, as other people explore this with us.
So it's great the work is being done along these lines by economists, because economists haven't done a lot of work in this area. So, one of the areas that I'm doing work on is actually is in a similar area, is looking at the effect of charitable food assistance on food insecurity in the United States. Okay, so if you look at food assistance programs in the United States, is the largest by far is SNAP. Okay, it's by far the largest. But the second largest form of free meals in the United States is charitable food assistance. In fact, it's bigger than National School Lunch Program, bigger than the School Breakfast Program, much bigger than WIC. I mean, WIC's a tiny, ineffective program. And so you have these things whereby you have all of these things with respect to, but people haven't concentrated nearly as much on charitable food assistance and its impact on food insecurity. There's been tons of work on these other programs, and rightfully so in terms of SNAP, given its size, but there hasn't been much work done on this. So the challenge with this is that about half of the people coming to food pantries are food secure. Between 40 and 50% are food secure, okay? So out of that group, some are food secure because they went to the pantry. Some are food secure even if they hadn't gone to the pantry. Okay, so we know the numbers that are food secure, we know the number of food insecure, but we don't know the question, what out of those who are food secure because they went to a pantry? And that's an important question, because we want to know that impact. Now, I can't see everybody in the audience, but I think there's 3 people who are interested in econometric issues, but probably the rest of you are not. This actually is a tricky econometric question to look at this issue. But from the standpoint is that when we do this using data taken from Feed America, along with data taken from the current population survey, is we find that food banks are responsible for about a 10% decline in food insecurity amongst those going to food pantries. Okay? So in other words, if we took away food pantries tomorrow, food insecurity rates would be about 10% higher in the United States. About 3 million more people, 3 to 4 more million people would be food insecure. This is a critical component of our social safety net, and it's an area in more research along the lines of what Tammy's talking about and in terms of our findings with respect to this.
So related to SNAP, one of the projects we're doing now is related to the SNAP benefit cycle. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the SNAP benefit cycle is, many economists have found, is that SNAP recipients spend most of their SNAP benefits in the first week or so, and by the last week of that benefit cycle, they don't really have enough money, basically, to buy food. And so it's a big issue, this SNAP benefit cycle. And so many states have tweaked their, ways of figuring out when they should issue the SNAP benefits. But the new thing that we're doing now is we're figuring out how the SNAP benefit cycle actually relates to how it differs depending on whether the SNAP recipient has a diet-related disease or not, like diabetes. And luckily, there's a data set out there related to Nielsen data and IRI that has data and information on whether the SNAP recipient has a diet-related disease or not, or on special diet. And so that's one of the things that we're doing now, and I think we're excited about it because no one has done this before. Another exciting thing I'm currently doing with a couple of PhD students is we're collaborating with Walmart and Numerator to conduct an experiment, if you will, in Walmart stores to figure out what nudges can incentivize SNAP recipients to purchase more fruits and vegetables out of their SNAP benefits. And so that will be a study that will be done in several months, with the control and treated groups, obviously, so we can estimate basically the causal effect of these different interventions or nudges.
I'm so glad I'm on this panel with Rudy because we're going to be partners in crime. I just know it because the SNAP benefit cycle is so important. In fact, that's what led us to our project, this financial coaching, because, I don't know, and I know there's a lot of folks out there that run pantries that are in this space, and you know it. You know your space. But I can tell you when I've engaged with most pantries, and I say, when do people come to the pantry? And they say, oh, we tell them to come before they get their SNAP benefits so they can see what's here. We have limited supply, and then they go. And then I say, well, do they? And they're like, oh, yeah, I think so. I've gotten that more often. Never found evidence for that. In fact, when I started working with Crossroads, and Crossroads is no other, right? We worked this, we had that conversation. That was probably about 10 years ago. And we started asking people, how many SNAP benefits do you have left when they come to the pantry? Guess what fraction of their clients had any SNAP benefits left? Less than 10%. They come after. And so it's not only the SNAP cycle, it's important for policy and for the goodwill of the people, but it also feeds into our pantry cycling, right? In the Texas, it's the first 15 days of the month that those benefits come due. And so we're all following this cycle, and it's impacting the work we do in different ways that we don't even know. And that was how we got in these conversations. We were actually did an RCT where we had people come to the pantry when they got their SNAP benefits, and then another group that came to the pantry 3 weeks after they got their SNAP benefits. And we saw that even during the pandemic, it's great when you do this controlled trial and then the whole world goes out of control. But we found, though, that weekly food expenditures for those people that had their pantry visit at the same time they were getting their SNAP benefits over the course of a 7-month window, where it used to be spike, you could tell when they got their SNAP benefits, there'd be a big grocery trip, and then they would stay no food spending. It smoothed it out, right? And so we saw some evidence of this, it's not causal because we had a darn pandemic in the wake of our study. But I think there's a lot around this benefit cycle. And anyway, Rudy, we're going to have to follow up.
I've got more questions, but any other comments you all would like to offer on the basis of what fellow panelists have said?
I really like what Craig mentioned about the charitable food thing, because I think that's really important. I didn't know it's the second one. So we've done some work as well on how we can motivate people to donate more money on charitable organizations, including for food stuff. Yeah.
And there's, I think, too, one thing is that it undergirds all this, the behavioral stuff, food decisions you're making at Walmart, what the charitable food system's doing, is that the people being served by these systems are really smart. I was at a meeting the other day and somebody said, poor doesn't make you unsmart. There's a lot of smart people that happen to be poor. We saw data, we looked at Crossroads did a change in how they were just running their pantry, how they were structuring what people did. And what it did is putting my economist hat on, we're like, oh, it changed the opportunity cost for selecting different foods. And so when they quit doing something that was aimed at improving the nutrition of the choices of the people, it switched opportunity costs such that choosing more fruits and vegetables became the better buy in the pantry. And, we didn't tell people this, we just did the program. Crossroads was not intending to change the world with this program. It was just, how you do things because you need to do them to keep your thing going, right? But we saw people shift towards greater fruit and vegetable consumption because of a small shift in opportunity cost at the pantry in getting that versus other foods. I say that charitable food sector is hugely important. There are lots of ways being studied how, in the commercial setting, how we affect people's choices. Our challenge, I think, is how are we doing this in the nonprofit sector? Because even if you're not doing it intentionally, you are doing it, right? That's what we learned with Crossroads. They were intentionally trying to do one thing, but they were, without intending to, doing something else, right? And so there's a lot to be done here because we've got some really smart people that we're serving, and they are adjusting their behavior based on what we put before them.
Thank you all. Before we turn to some questions, I want to back up a little bit and ask each of you to say something about how you got into this field, not particularly economics, but this focus of food insecurity, and what motivates you to do this work. And tell us a little bit about that side of your lives as researchers, please. Rudy, why don't you start, and we'll come this way.
I think for me, right after I got my PhD, I focused on the business side, the agribusiness, food and agribusiness side. But it wasn't really satisfying to me because, sorry for those of you in the industry, I didn't want to work on things that can further increase profits of the private sector. It wasn't as satisfying for me, and so that's why I moved to issues that are more on the food policy side, and poverty reduction issues and so on. I was born in the Philippines, and so I grew up in the Philippines, and as you all know, the Philippines is a third world country. So talk about food insecurity. I mean, there are major food insecurity issues in the Philippines and many developing countries. So, I mean, I think it's just natural for me to really get attached to this issue.
So I went to University of Notre Dame for my undergraduate, and one thing was really talked a lot about Notre Dame is Catholic social teaching. So I got way into Catholic social teaching when I was there and thought about, well, how can I put this into place? We're all called, as Christians, we're called to help alleviate food insecurity. For some of us, that's working, say, as a housekeeper. For some of us, it's working as a garbage collector. For some of us, it's working as an accountant. All these things come together to bring along a more wonderful society that everybody can live in and be food secure. So everybody's work is important. I have very limited skills, so I became an economist. And so that's what I decided to further in terms of Catholic social teaching, was to address some of these issues, and then I got my PhD.
That's an honest answer right there.
and then I got my PhD, and then I just began. There's a housing poverty, but then I started to work on. USDA hired me to do work on their new food insecurity measure, the one we're talking a lot about here in 1996. And I've been doing research every single day in and day out, on food insecurity and the evaluation of food assistance programs. So that's how I became involved in this area.
I think it's, oh, there we go. I think it's really fascinating that all of our journeys began. We were in undergrad. I don't know if there's students in the audience, but mine was similar. And like Craig, I felt compelled to do something to help people in the world. But I also knew that I was not good at all those things that I saw helping people. Doing things like being on this stage is absolutely terrifying for me. So I'm happiest in front of my computer with some code, and I've got a great day. So how do you do that? So, when I was an undergrad at A&M, my freshman year, I lived in a dorm that was right next to the All Faiths Chapel that's there on campus. And it dawned on me that I will never live this close to a church probably again in my life. So during Lent that year, I spent an hour in that chapel trying to figure out this question. And so I tell my own kids, there's no shortcut to good discernment. I'm far from that age now, and I'm still figuring it out, still discerning. But in that journey, at one point in my undergrad career was being, recruited to be like a Rhodes Scholar applicant for A&M, and got really mad in that meeting because they were wanting me to do all these things to help the world, which I felt like I should help the world in some way, but it was all artificial. It was for a scholarship application. And so I ended up doing a year of mission work after I graduated. And by the way, I was a chemical engineer, so I was far from this space. And I was able to get a company to give me a leave of absence right off the bat to go do mission work for a year. I was there in Central America whenever 9/11 happened. And what people in the US probably aren't really acutely aware of is the turmoil that event had on the economy of people in small countries in Latin America that depend on the US for so much of their economic activity. And so there were riots in our village, my students' families, the cost of a bus trip to the city where their families could get work was more than a day's wages. Because of what was happening in the US, it caused all these upside down things. And I found myself consoling a little boy from the village that I had known really well. We'd gotten a relationship. He had just watched his older brother getting shot by the police during one of those riots, and all they were doing was fighting for their family to be able to eat. And in a third world country, you don't have options when you're consoling someone like that. There's no happy story. I mean, it's tough. But in that moment, I felt like God spoke, and he's like, you like to solve problems? You like systems? I got a system for you. And so I never intended to be in the food insecurity space. I saw the economy as a system that we all operate in, and I felt like, you know what? I have no idea how my nerdy skills could be used. But we'll try it. So I wrote my applications for PhD with this crazy idea that I developed in Latin America. No idea. I had taken one economics course in my undergrad, but God opens doors. He opens one door at a time sometimes, and you're waiting for that door. But really happy to be in this space and just so privileged. I feel all of us. I mean, how could we be so lucky to get to spend our professional life doing something that's so meaningful? I think that's a great gift.
We'll take some of the questions now. Grace has let me know that we have less than 15 minutes, and we have questions. We're going to have to go another 2 hours, I think, with all the great questions that have been submitted. So hopefully some of you whose questions don't get asked can connect with some of our speakers during the day. Let me ask a question, a version of which has come up a couple of times here. How do you communicate your research with policymakers? Quantitative or qualitative? How do you make it clear without, while maintaining the integrity of your data? What have you found is effective in communicating with policymakers?
I'm probably the worst person to ask, because if somebody says, make comments like WIC is ineffective, that's not the type of person you want going in front of policymakers. So from the standpoint, but what I have learned is that there's a few, if you can get some of your points down to a few key things that you emphasize from your research, that's robust research findings. And I'll give a couple examples, just 2 examples here, is we know that SNAP is an incredibly successful program. Okay? And part of the reason why SNAP is an incredibly successful program is many different reasons. But one is that it gives dignity and autonomy to recipients. It allows them to shop alongside their friends and neighbors, and it allows them to make their own food choices. Okay? There's a push in some communities to restrict what people can purchase with their SNAP benefits. Okay? So being able to articulate to policymakers, A, SNAP works, but B, if you impose these restrictions, take away people's dignity and autonomy, you're going to drive up food insecurity. To create a real clear causal chain to say, here is what will happen if you do this. Okay? That's the first example. The second example is I oftentimes give to policymakers is that we know that food prices lead to higher rates of food insecurity. So we have to be careful in our society to not do things that would raise food prices. Food prices increases are bad, really bad. What are 2 ways that food prices increase? When people decide to tax food, and when people choose to impose regulations on different things. I say the cruelest tax to poor people is to have higher taxes on food, sales tax, it's a regressive tax, but also whenever you impose regulations, it drives up food prices. And the classic example I'd give is these, I don't know if anybody from California is here, but California has this crazy cage-free chicken law. Okay, so the chickens now can go, they can walk around, whatever chickens do, whenever they're out of their cages. But, the problem is you know what happened? The price of eggs doubled in California, The fancy people in California could all afford those more expensive egg prices. Poor people can't. And who gets punished by it? Poor people. So there has to be a clear connection. So that's also what I say is a clear connection between if you do this, you may say, oh, cage-free eggs is a great thing. Yeah. But look who gets hurt. People. Chickens might be happier, though.
Rudy, help us out here.
I need to be more proactive about this issue, actually, because I'm not very good at it. But what I've learned through the years is if you make the title of your published paper really catchy and simple, and also your abstract really clear and very much policy-oriented, that it catches the attention of journalists and the media. And that's when they contact us, when they think the topic is really relevant and quote-unquote sexy. And we've been trying to do this actually in the profession, in the ag economics profession. So we have marketing communications teams now that help us with these things.
Well, all I have to say is I'm probably the worst at this on this stage. So we can go to another question because you've got the good answer.
Here, I'm not going to let you off the spot here, Tammy. Here's a question for you. When advising people already in financial and food insecurity, how do you motivate them to disrupt the cycle?
Motivate the people that are working in this area or
I think the
people.
The individuals.
Yeah. So if you're in that's a hard question. Our approach through coaching, the coaching approach is not about me telling you what to do. It's me saying, what do you want to achieve? Now, a lot of times people don't know. That's one of our biggest takeaways. We're just doing qualitative evaluation at this point of our problem. And people don't even know how to answer that question because they've probably never been asked seriously in a way that somebody's like, I'm going to help you get there too. If you're asked and then it's just words, it never has meaning. So you have to do a little coaching. But I think it's asking people what they want. Like, look, they're smart people that just happen to be poor. And articulating it's another step. We all know we don't articulate all our ideas well, so we kind of have to help them articulate it into a way that's meaningful. But again, as a good coach always knows they're not in the driver's seat. They're the enabler in a certain direction, right? Not enabler in a bad sort of way. So, to me, disrupting the system there's nothing new here. It's listening to people and having conversations and truly oftentimes we listen. Oftentimes we say, oh, I value you. Dr. Hibbs, you're a philosopher. I value philosophers so much.
Thank you.
But then I go back and say, I'm an engineer and an economist. He's a philosopher. He just talks about stuff. That is not going to disrupt any system. I have to say, oh my gosh, our culture is better because of philosophers, and I have to really believe that. Same thing with the people in front of us. Our world is better because you are here. And there's great dignity in you. And my job is to unleash that to the world. And I think that's how we disrupt every system in this world that needs disrupting, is the age-old truth, realizing the dignity in every human person created in the image and likeness of God.
So there's a question, I think, that goes back to some of Craig's opening comments about the causes or conditions that generally lead to food insecurity, and a question about vulnerable populations, the disabled, the recently incarcerated, those dealing with mental health or addiction. What kind of research, what kind of outreach, what kind of programs do we have that differentiates amongst those populations, and how much of a differentiation is actually needed in those cases?
You mean differentiation amongst those four groups?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, there's huge overlap between all four of those things. Okay. And let me make one brief comment. I mean, those are the persons who our society often ignores, okay? And as Christians, that's who we're called to help, more so than any other group. And So it's really, really important that we talk about these at Baylor and other places, about the critical importance of helping out these groups. Now, in terms of, there's been very little work amongst these groups. I mean, it's amazing how little research has been done on this. And I always tell people, please do research, because it's really important. More and more on disability, but not nearly enough. We don't know enough about the causal pathways of mental health to food insecurity. We can speculate about some of these, but we don't know enough about it. So let's figure that out. But I want to give one example of the issue of those who were recently incarcerated. One of the things is, when people go out of prison, oftentimes it's a very lonely experience. They may be isolated from their families, they may be isolated from friends and everything. So we're trying to figure out, think about different ways that we could help out, welcoming people back to this community. Some of you are aware of BCHIP's Meals to You program, where we give meals to, boxes of food to low-income children at schools all around the country, okay, during summer. I think something like that would be a great program for people who got out of prison recently. Give them a box of food. Say, welcome back to our community. I don't know if this would work. I have no idea if it works, but it'd be something worth investigating. So in other words, try to think of creative things that could be done along these, because as I mentioned before, I love SNAP. SNAP is an amazing program, most successful government program we've ever had. I love SNAP, okay? But it doesn't do a good job at addressing particular challenges individuals are facing, like the recently incarcerated. So let's figure this out. Let's be creative. I'm not a very creative person, I'm just a simple economist. But all of you probably have some really, really good ideas about how we can help out all these different groups that I'm talking about.
Rudy, you mentioned in passing food justice, and there was a request for you to elaborate a little on that field of research and inquiry.
Well, I think it's related to having a little more equity, right, in terms across different subgroups of the population, especially racial groups, minorities, and so on. And so that's been an area of emphasis for many ag economists. And that obviously includes environmental justice issues as well.
So we've got a question about cost of eating healthy versus eating junk food. I always hear that eating healthy is more expensive than eating junk or fast food. Is it true? And if not, how do we change that narrative?
Well, it depends on how you define some of it. It really comes down to a lot of definitions.
We're going to talk about chicken again?
just cage-free eggs. Anyway, is that quote unquote, okay, the first thing is I want to say is, if we want to improve people's nutrition in the United States, a necessary condition is that people be food secure. Just moving people from food insecurity to food security improves their nutrient intakes. So just getting food to people is important, because once you have more resources. Now, the issue about whether or not eating healthy is more expensive, there's a lot of evidence that it's really not more expensive to quote unquote eat healthy. The reason I put in quotes is it changes every 5 years what's healthy. But at any rate, is from the standpoint that eating healthy, however, is that quote unquote eating healthy at a lower cost also requires a lot more food preparation. So I think we really have to be sympathetic towards those. I mean, you see these commercials where people are sitting down to these meals, cutting, everybody in the family is sitting around cutting up food and getting together. Yeah, that's wonderful in some cases, but it's back to my issue about other people don't have that luxury of this time. They don't have that luxury of being able to cook amongst their whole family. There's a lot of lonely people who just want to have some food prepared for them and things like that, and that can be a bit more expensive. Okay, so in other words, if thinking about food, you have to think about both the cost you pay at the food store, but also the cost in terms of your time and energy to make this, plus your knowledge with respect to this. So it really is a complicated issue about it.
I was just going to chime in too that, food is complicated. It's not just an input. It's also social, as Craig, there's so many aspects to it. In a study, one of my colleagues, we were doing, I think this is some of the work you helped us fund, Craig. We were talking with seniors about how they get food, and we were surprised quite a few were really disappointed during the pandemic when Six Flags quit having, they had a meal plan where you could buy like a ticket and you could go there and eat all your food. There was quite a few food insecure seniors that were doing this. It boggles your mind why, but you have to understand food, right? We understand food is more dynamic. So it gets into maybe they're making these decisions because they're food insecure and it's unhealthy, but it's also because food is grabbing at their social needs as well.
I want to ask maybe one of you could address this fairly briefly because we're coming very close to the end here. Tammy mentioned crisis earlier, and the pressures, the needs are great, a sense of crisis to meet those needs. And yet at the Baylor Collaborative, we want to emphasize the importance of evaluation and research and evidence-based solutions. Why is it so important to have evaluation built into interventions and to programming? If one of you could sort of just take that briefly here at the end.
Well, I'll do, so here's what I tell people. I'm always going to nonprofits saying, can you collect some data? Can you do this a little bit smarter so we can evaluate it? First of all, evaluation needs to be right-sized. If you're doing too much, you can be doing too much evaluation. So let me clarify that. Evaluation needs to be right-sized. This financial coaching thing, we're talking to people. Okay, we will eventually get to the numbers, but you gotta have it right size. Please don't get taken. I think that's what happens oftentimes, and then we end up conflicting, but it's because we haven't had collaborative process and understanding what's the right evaluation for the right time. But why should you do it? And my answer that I stick to is the people we serve are in this for the long term. What we do today is going to affect whether their kids are going to get a great education. They might be here for multiple generations, and if they aren't, it's still going to have a multi-generational impact on them. Research is about the long term. So they're in it for the long term, so should we be.
And just, if I could just add one thing to that, is first of all, I mean, nothing better, if you think about food, it's like a big piece of fatty brisket on your plate with some other stuff on there to go beside it. I mean, that's critical in terms of food. It may not be the healthiest, but it's good. So the food is enjoyable too, and it should be enjoyable. But that's an aside about brisket. But at any rate, is from the standpoint of this evaluation is we have to be, there's so many things out there that are being done that have never been evaluated, and I can bet you a plate of brisket is they probably don't work. They probably don't work over what they're saying they're outside achieve. For us to be good stewards of donors' money, we need to make sure that these things work and evaluate them properly. So I think as being good stewards is really important.
I just want to add that I think one of the areas that a lot of economists are focusing on now is not just figuring out or evaluating the effectiveness of a program or initiative at a smaller scale. The bigger issue now that they're focusing on is how the specific programs that may be beneficial at a micro level can be scaled up, basically, right? So the testing, the scaling up effect is really important, I think.
Thank you. Before Craig launches into analysis of another food group, I'm gonna call this to a close. Rudy, Craig, and Tammy, thank you. Please join me in thanking the panel.